Namaste mera dosto, Elizabeth Tucker here. I hope you're doing well. One of the most crucial topics that is affecting our society today is what I want to talk about in this video. I will review British Muslim grooming jihad. This is the same pattern we see going on in India currently that we will see here from the 80s and 90s and also today. So let's take a look at what happened and what is still happening and try to come up with a solution. Hopefully, we can learn something from this.
Some scandals are so massive that they're simply hard to believe. But this one is true. As many as 1 million white English children may have been the victims of Muslim rape gangs, better known as grooming gangs, in towns up and down Great Britain. Policy analyst George Igler.
I mean, when you counter an issue that is just so unbelievable, just so outside your frame of reference and understanding, the immediate human reaction is just not want to believe it at all.
Perhaps even harder to believe is that while there have been prosecutions, British authorities have still not stopped this criminal activity. There's a particular problem involving Pakistani heritage men who target young, vulnerable white English girls. Not my words, but a member of Parliament, Jack Straw, who also said these Pakistani heritage men view white English girls as, quote, easy meat. This is when some shout racism, but here are the facts. Calculations based on convictions show that a British Muslim male is 170 times more likely to be part of a sex grooming gang than a non-Muslim. And there are no recorded instances of non-Muslims doing this to Muslim girls as part of a criminal enterprise. In one local jurisdiction, it was estimated that 6 out of 7 Muslim males either knew about or were part of a grooming gang.
What you do not have is any example of non-Muslim men targeting Muslim girls for this organized form of abuse. So the argument that this crime exists everywhere is not only false, but is being deliberately cultivated by the media and by the government inquiry that is kicking the can down the road.
The grooming gangs have been traced back as far as the late 1980s. At-risk white English girls, often from broken homes and some as young as 9 years old, were wooed or groomed by teenage Muslim boys called Romeos, and even by groups of Muslim men who hung around school gates. The plan was to make the girl feel important. She was given gifts and drugs, but she was being groomed to be a drug-addicted prostitute. Then came the gang rapes. The girls were threatened with death if they tried to flee.
It's not just sexual abuse. It is unspeakable levels of violence. Victims being raped with knives, victims being raped with bottles, victims having their tongue nailed to tables. These are sometimes girls who are being picked up from children's homes on a Friday, are being raped during the course of the weekend by hundreds of men, and then returned with bleeding groins back to the children's homes on a Monday morning, and they don't do anything about it at all.
Christine's goddaughter was preyed on by the grooming gangs and is helping girls through the group Women Against Grooming.
They pulled up by the side of her in cars. They tried to get her in the car. They were talking to her. Come with us, we'll take you here, we'll take you there.
Were you saying that the authorities make it sound like it's the English girl's fault?
Yeah, or the parents' fault. It's your fault because you haven't got control of your child.
What?
If you are a young English girl, particularly between the ages of 9 and 14, and you find yourself subject to the perversions of Muslim men, you effectively exist in a country where the forces of law and order don't exist at all.
Stephen Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, former leader of the English Defence League, was just a young boy in the town of Luton when he learned a family member had been victimized by a grooming gang.
My cousin was raped and she was found naked running from the Muslim community.
Oh my God.
The police wouldn't help. All the police would say is she's a drug addict. She was a drug addict because they got her hooked on drugs after grooming and raping her.
Some say grooming gangs originate from a particular region of Pakistan, but others point out that the Quran encourages Muslims to take enemy women as sex slaves, and that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old wife. ISIS defends sexual slavery as Islamic, saying, enslaving the families of the infidels and taking their women as concubines is a firmly established aspect of the Sharia, or Islamic law. The reason these crimes were covered up and continue to this day is political correctness. No one wanted to be called a racist. The definitive book on this scandal is Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin, who declined an on-camera interview for safety reasons. He told us journalists would not speak about it because the perpetrators were mostly dark-skinned and Muslim. Childcare professionals used political correctness as an omerta, a code of silence concerning what the public was allowed to know.
These girls are the victims of a multicultural revolution, and it's certainly an indication of the fact that this accusation of racism is potentially the most powerful political weapon known to man. This is also an example of what can happen in a country of 60 million where the press just refuse to report, where the cries of all these agencies fail to merely discuss what's going on. And it's only going to get worse for this reason.
The cover-up was eventually exposed, yet the grooming gangs continue to operate. One victim told a British newspaper, "Nothing has changed, not in the slightest. It's still the same scale as before."
They get sexual kicks out of ruining the most precious possession that those people have, their daughters.
Stephen Lennon warned that there will be repercussions.
But there will be a lot of blood spilled in this country, and it'll be on the hands of our leaders. And there'll come a time when they will realise what they've done. And the country's people will realise what they've done as well. They've sold us out, they've destroyed our nation, they've destroyed our culture.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
All right, now to an issue that has shaken the Asian community in the United Kingdom. Thousands of girls have fallen prey to what's being called grooming gangs. Sex traffickers and abusers, predominantly British Pakistanis who target Sikh girls. WION's London Bureau Chief Mandy Clark investigates.
Inside Britain's tight-knit Sikh communities, there are hundreds of victims of sexual abuse.
Literally hundreds. You get cases which are, we call them green, amber, and sort of red. Reds are the real sort of nasty cases.
Red cases like Hernaz. Her name has been changed, and her voice has been modified to protect her identity. When Hernaz first met her abuser, he seemed kind.
Met on Diwali. It was in a public place. We bumped into each other. I fell and he gave me his hand to help me up.
Hernaz was only 16 when the man began the process of grooming her. They exchanged phone numbers and talked for days before their first meeting in a park.
Never had that interaction with a male where the male wanted to listen to what I had to say about the stuff that was happening in my life at that time.
Hernaz felt special. This form of abuse starts off slow. The groomer will pretend to be a caring friend, buying gifts and listening to her stories, all in an effort to gain her trust before turning on her.
Well, it happened on the second time that we met. I never thought twice about it. When I got in the car, I never thought that he would lie to me about where we were going, but also who would be there. I was taken to a B&B.
The men plied her with drugs and alcohol and raped her. It was just the starting of her abuse. Hernaz was only willing to tell her story to Mohan Singh, a face she trusts. He's been trying to help victims of grooming in his community for over a decade. The plight of girls like Hernaz is the reason behind Singh's mission to visit every single one of Britain's 300 gurdwaras. Today, he's visiting the biggest one in London.
Now, sexual grooming.
He helped set up the Sikh Awareness Society back in the 1990s after growing concern within his community that young children were being sexually abused. But his advocacy has spread to other South Asian communities.
The problem throughout all communities. Since the last couple of years, we have been working within mandars, within Buddhist temples, Jain temples, and churches.
It doesn't just affect the Sikh community. Dipin Rajaguru is a director with the Hindu Council UK.
We are aware of Hindu girls also being targeted by these grooming gangs.
Many South Asian communities are honor-based with deeply held traditional religious views. For many, virginity before marriage is held sacred, and it can make it very difficult for the abused girls and their families.
In fact, that's the part of the grooming process. You pick on the most vulnerable people. You know about their culture. You know that it will be taboo in their culture, and they use it against them.
Singh's lectures are uncomfortable listening for most Sikhs. The sexual grooming of girls can be a taboo subject in this community. One of his biggest battles is persuading families to reach out for help. Harnaz believes she was targeted because she was Sikh.
I think they realised that if I spoke up about anything, I would be the one to be at blame because I lost my virginity.
Over a dozen Sikh parents have gone as far as to send their children abroad to get them out of harm's way.
There's a lot of young people that we've moved to other countries because literally they wouldn't be able to make it in this country because they're always looking over their shoulder.
It may sound extreme, but many Sikh parents believe they had to move their children because they were in danger here in the UK from Muslim groomers. It's a deeply controversial accusation, but the two faith groups have a history of religious conflict.
You know, I can only speak on the evidence that we've collected since '97. And we're dealing with gangs of people, we're dealing with groups of people who belong to one ethnic group, who belong to one sort of faith.
Through the data, statistics, and what's happening within the criminal justice system, we know that the majority of the perpetrators are caught were Pakistani men. So it's something which the Pakistani community really needs to take hold of to ensure if this is being engendered within their community, it's going to create not just problems externally, but for us, what about your own women folk? You know, if you're able to pick on other vulnerable women, how much do you respect your own?
If a Sikh man does something wrong, label it a Sikh man. If a Muslim is doing something wrong, label it. At least we'll know at the end of the day where the problem is by calling a spade a spade.
Muhammad Shafiq is a Muslim advocate and finds these accusations harmful.
And I think what's really unhelpful is for the Sikh community to make this into a Muslim versus Sikh issue, you know, a religious issue. There's no religious connotation to this.
I think the people are making it
Muslims
that,
reject
not the
rape
Sikhs.
and abuse of children.
No,
that's not
in
Islam.
It's the pattern that's
and
happening.
I think that's where we've got to focus our energy, working together in partnership, collectively, to tackle this problem. Because, you know, if the Sikhs go off and do their own thing, the Muslims do their own thing, the Hindus do their own thing, I don't think we'll be able to eradicate this.
He says the problem lies not in the religion, but in the Pakistani culture.
It's a cultural issue. It's cultural baggage from the Indian subcontinent. You know, yes, Pakistan, India are two different countries. Yes, there are different religions, Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam. But actually, some of the cultural practices are endemic within all those communities. So, for example, forced marriages.
So is this guy making excuses?
Actually, you get that in the
it
Hindu
sounds to me like
community
he's just making excuses
a
for
Muslim
their
problem.
bad,
I think there is an
horrible behavior.
overrepresentation because that's what the facts
No
suggest.
excuse for
the real thing
this
here
at
that we've got to
all.
focus
This is
on
so
is
inhumane.
what can we do to stop it? And I think there is going to be a self-reflection on the Pakistani community. Why is it that more and more of our men are involved in these crimes? Well, I think one of the reasons is obviously, I think, because there's a form of racism involved. They think that white girls are worthless, or they might think that Sikh girls are worthless, or Hindu girls are worthless, and therefore, they're at liberty to do what they want.
For Harnaz, the blackmail and abuse would continue for months. She says the men forced her into prostitution. It was only when she heard Singh's lecture at a Gurdwara that she felt that she could talk to someone.
I find it more comfortable talking to you than I did with the police because I knew you would understand the cultural aspect of the difficulty of coming forward about this and how I would find it difficult to be able to speak about things like this. You helped me understand that what was happening wasn't my fault, that what they were doing was they were taking advantage of me.
After hearing her story, Singh was determined to prove that she was being abused. He launched his own private investigation over several weeks. He revisited all the locations where the abuse occurred and tracked down witnesses. Ultimately, he provided the police with key evidence that led to an investigation and helped convict the abusers. It was the first ever case involving a Sikh victim of sexual grooming to have been successfully taken to court. The perpetrators were sentenced but have now been released.
I received numerous phone calls from private numbers. Sometimes there is a voice, they laugh, they mock me, they say, "Don't you remember who I am?" So I get these phone calls. All you can really do is to change your number and go to the police.
Singh remains in close contact with Hernaz, guiding her through the healing process. She's in therapy now and dealing with the traumas of her past.
These are self-harm scars. I have them on my stomach and on my legs and on both of my arms. The last time I self-harmed was
pure
6 months
evil.
ago.
It's
It's the
pure
longest
evil.
I've ever gone without self-harming in my life.
For Singh, freeing a victim from the clutches of her abusers is his greatest achievement.
The joy, inner peace that comes when you can bring peace into somebody's life. I don't have to wait to die to see heaven. I see it there.
He sees this work as his life mission, to stop the gangs abusing any more girls. Mandy Clark, WION, London.
I think a lot of people will unfortunately say that these girls deserve it, but these girls are children and really not understanding what they are getting themselves into. And since they are from a low-income area, they are most often targeted. It is like these Muslims are going to small, young girls and promising them the world when they have been in a tough situation for years, for most of their lives. Who would not fall for this at their age? We also have to understand from this video is that this grooming process started decades ago in Britain. We can see now where Britain is headed. The Christian population has decreased significantly, and they have become a minority. This did not happen in one night, as these things happen due to these grooming procedures carried out to harm humanity. The same thing that started 20 years ago in Britain is starting in India. It is like a time machine. We see what happens after 20 years in Britain already and what it has become. India will also be this in 20 years due to love jihad, because people are not taking it seriously. We cannot become one love, one world type of planet if becoming this is allowing Hindu girls and Sikh girls to be thrown under the bus because they are targeted first always. Hindu girls need to not only become aware of these situations, but really understand how these guys think. They're just machines doing what they're told, teaching this type of warfare to others so that they can get their purpose. There is no love in that. It is just sinister and evil, which makes them the trash. It also makes them cowards. Well, I hope you understand where I'm coming from in this video. I'll see you in the next one. Ram Ram.
You made a policy this week about tackling extremism and wanting to do more about that. I just wondered whether or not that would include doing more to tackle some of the grooming gangs that we see in our towns and cities across the country, Telford, Rotherham, Bradford, where my constituency is. What can you say to people in those areas about what you do to try and make sure that we clamp down more on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I have two young girls who are 9 and 11, and I think for too long we just haven't focused on this issue, Philip. And it's a horrific crime that is affecting actually not just girls in a few places, it's far more pervasive across the country than actually we all realise. And we all know the reason that people don't focus on it. It's because of political correctness, and they're scared of calling out the fact that there's a particular group of people who are perpetuating these crimes, and I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong, and I want to change that as Prime Minister. So what I've said is we'll have a new task force at the National Crime Agency that's focused on this. We will have a requirement for police forces everywhere to prioritise this. I want to make sure that all police forces record the ethnicity of those involved, which currently is not done because people don't want to do that. And I want to create a brand new life sentence for those involved in grooming with very limited options for parole, because I'm not going to let political correctness stand in the way of tackling this absolutely horrific crime. I want to call it out for what it is, and I want to tackle it properly, because when you read about it, it's awful. And you know, I have 2 young girls and I feel this very personally, but a Conservative government should be not letting political correctness stand in the way of keeping people safe, and that's what I want to do.